Hi, I'm Christina Simone, and this is sermon number 5 for Intro to Preaching. The Bible talks about rest in many different ways and in many different times. From the beginning of the Bible all the way from Genesis all the way through Revelations, the idea of rest, the title, the topic, the instruction to rest is given many times, and that's what we're going to take a look at. In Psalms 37:7, one of my favorite verses starts by saying, "Rest in the Lord and wait patiently on him." This is just one of the many verses that encourage us to rest in the Lord. Exodus chapter 20, verse 11 also encourages that we rest in the Lord. In the book of Exodus, the idea of rest is more of an instruction. It teaches on the importance of taking a day of rest and to have time to give to God, to stay in peace in the instruction of God, to rest in the Sabbath. Although early in biblical times, the idea of Sabbath was one day, the seventh day of the week, as was instructed in Genesis, the Jewish culture rested a full day, one day a week. The idea of Sabbath in modern times can be viewed as time taken away from the hustle and bustle of life and the busyness that we allow ourselves to be caught up in, and just spending time away with just God, separating ourselves unto God for the purpose of just resting in his presence and cultivating and working on the relationship that we have with God. Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 and 30 says, "Come to me, all ye who are burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." God is instructing that we would go to him, that we would find the rest for our weary bodies and our minds. God, knowing the structure of how we were made, knew that in him we could find rest. In the book of Isaiah, chapter 14, verses 3 and 4, promises that God will give you rest and relief from the turmoil that is created because of our work. Isaiah chapter 26, verse 3 assures perfect peace for those whose mind are steadfast on the Lord. Isaiah 57, verses 1 and 2 says that even in death, the righteousness of God shall find rest and peace. There is no shortage of scriptures that explain the benefits that God will heap on those that will follow the instruction in the ways of his life, including to rest. Just after Jesus told the disciples in John chapter 16 that he would send the Comforter, in verse 33 of that same chapter, Jesus makes it clear his reason for telling them of the trouble in the world, only to make clear that he, Jesus, had overcome, and that they, the disciples, and the rest of us that believe based on the salvation formula, could rest knowing that they too would overcome the world and the trials in it. The word rest appeared enough in the Bible to grab my attention because this seemed an elusive idea with our busy schedules and the timetable that we attempt to meet in this modern day. For me, life seems to be happening faster than what it could possibly be. Work, family, bills, school, church activities, and events, the list of things that take my time and energy seem to be endless, as it is for every human on earth. It seems that even when rest is in the schedule, it doesn't seem to be very long. I do know that the few times I've been able to rest in the Lord, life seems completely manageable. The next instruction in the 7th verse of Psalms chapter 37 is to wait patiently on him. This verse is instructing us to rest in the Lord and to rest patiently. Rest patiently when we are in the middle of our trials and struggle. This means that in the whirlwind of life, when there's hardship and pain, that God wants me to rest in him and wait patiently for him to work in me. Rest and patience are two things that I have little time for when I find myself in the throes of life. The rest and patience, yet these things are what God is calling us to. I spend a lot of time talking with the Lord about work, bills, family, fears, my faults, as I'm sure many of you do as well. I found there's such a beauty in talking with him and hearing from him that resting in him And the relationship that I have with him is the instruction that he is giving. This is the idea of the Sabbath that he is requiring of us. In Genesis chapter 2, verses 2 and 3, by the seventh day, God had finished the work that he had begun doing. And on the seventh day, he rested from all of his work. Then God blessed the seventh day, and he made it holy. Because of it, he rested from all of the work and the creation that he had done. God himself thought it was so important that we rest in what we have accomplished and in him, in the relationship that we have with him. He felt it was so important that he even included it in himself. God doesn't actually need rest. It wasn't something that he required. He has no physical body. He does not grow weary, and time means nothing to him. So the idea that he included in the first book of our Bible that he rested and finds it just as important that we rest is reason for us to take note. God spends a lot of time talking about it. When I started thinking of the kind of rest that God was calling us to, the rest in his relationship, it becomes something that I can do easily. I can rest in God's love because I know that he loves me unconditionally. I can rest in the joy that he has for me because I know that his joy comes from a place that is unending, and from a place that can't be changed. When I rest in the peace that God gives me, I know that everything that has taken up my time is going to be worked out. And it becomes very simple and very easy because I know the one that I rest in. I have faith that I can rest. Although day to day can't promise you a better job or less stress or perfect life, but the promise that comes with resting in God does bring about the promises. Remember the Sabbath day and keeping it holy. 6 days we will labor, but one day we will not. Exodus 20, verses 8 through 10. But the seventh day is for the Lord your God. We are to rest in him. Isaiah 14, verses 4 and 3. And on the day the Lord gives you relief from your sufferings and turmoil and harsh labor on you, you will take rest. You will take up this taunt against the king of Babylon, and he will give you rest. Psalms 55 and verse 6. Oh, that I had the wings of love, that I would fly away and find rest. Mark chapter 6, verse 31. Then because so many people were coming and going that they did not have a chance to rest, Jesus said unto them, come with me by yourselves to a quiet place and rest. When Jesus was on the earth, he instructed his disciples many times to rest. He asked them to separate themselves on a number of occasions. This in chapter 6 of Mark is one example of God asking the disciples to separate themselves so that they would have the opportunity to rest. He instructed them many times that rest was important and that they could separate themselves willingly, or he sent them in a boat so that they would have the rest that they needed. Mark chapter 2, verse 27, he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man and the man not for Sabbath. This reiterates the idea that separating ourselves for a relationship with God, separating ourselves with the intention of giving that time wholly unto God and the relationship that you have with him really is the idea of Sabbath. God did separate the seventh day and he did make it holy. But for those of us who have the time on another day, separating that and making it our Sabbath is important. Exodus chapter 33, verses 14. The Lord replied, my presence will go with you and I will give you rest. In the book of Matthew, chapter 14, Jesus feeds the 5,000, and then he sends his disciples away to rest. When he comes to them later in the day, the seas are troubled, and Jesus is walking on the water, and he bids Peter to come to him. Peter joins him on the water, but as he recognizes the voice that is called to him. Peter rested, knowing that Jesus was who he said he was, and he walked on water with him. God asks each and every one of us to know him well enough to recognize his voice in the storm, and to recognize that we can rest in him in the storm. God bids each of us to come and to rest in him, to find our rest in him. Each of us has the opportunity to live a life resting in God's joy, peace, and love. This is a choice that we must make for ourselves. This is more than just coming to church on Sunday or being present at church functions. To know the fullness of what God has to offer through rest in him, we must know him. We have to recognize his voice in the storm and be able to find rest in his goodness still. It becomes an individual choice and an individual responsibility. I know I've failed many times to go into the presence of God and find rest, but I'm working on that every day, as I would encourage and invite you to as well. I know I'm never going to get this perfect, but I can keep seeking God with all my heart because I know that in him is everything that I need, including the rest that my body and my spirit needs. I'm just one person, a mere human, having been given the chance to stand in front of you for a few minutes. I don't have all the answers of life and the questions or life's questions. I probably can't make any one of your lives better. But I do know a God who can. And I know a God who is waiting for you to come to him and to find rest for your burdens. The struggles and the joys of life are all made better resting in who God is.